morning, everyone, and welcome to chapel this Wednesday, June the 23rd. I am Marianne Morris, Dean of Students here at Phillips Seminary, and today it is our pleasure to welcome back for a second time the Reverend Dr. Lori Pound-Fail, who will offer our message today. Though we are connecting all across the miles, we are together today in spirit, and I invite you now to close your eyes and center yourself with me. As we move into this time of worship, hear now these words of invocation. This day the Good Shepherd calls us to labor. He calls us to serve a struggling world, often in its darkest hours. Are you ready? He calls us to speak truth, inspire justice, and challenge abuse. Are you willing? He calls us to reprioritize our time, our energies, our financial spending. Are you able? He calls us to labor in the vineyards even when we are tired and discouraged. Are you committed? Yes, the Good Shepherd calls us to labor. But the Good Shepherd also calls us to rest. He beckons us to put down our tools and our technical devices. Will you carve out time for renewal? He beckons us to walk with him beside still waters. Will you embrace a moment of peace? He beckons us to stop making lists, making calls, making plans. Will you welcome a space for recentering? The Good Shepherd is calling you by name.
He knows my name. He knows my name. He knows my name. He knows my name. And know how he walks with me. And know how he talks with me. Oh, how he tells me that I am his own. Sing it.
You know my name. You know my name.
Oh,
You know my name. You know my name. Oh, how you comfort me.
I'm in love with
And oh, how you counsel me. Yeah. It still amazes me
you.
that I am your friend.
Pour out my heart to you. Give you my heart, Lord. Here in your presence, I am made. So now, pour out my heart to you. Come on, every heart sing together. You know. Come on, if you're glad he knows your blind spots, he knows your name, sing it. You know my name. Oh, come on. And oh, how you walk with me. Oh, how you walk with me. Oh, how you talk. Oh, how you talk with me. And oh, how he tells me. Oh, how you tell me. In spite of all I am. I am your own.
Our scripture lesson this morning comes from the Gospel of John. I will be reading from the 10th chapter, verses 11 through 17. Let us hear now the reading. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice, so that there will be one flock and one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. May God add blessings to the reading of these words.
No one is really surprised to hear words that describe Jesus as a shepherd. We have heard stories and seen paintings that people have created that show Jesus with a shepherd's crook or staff and sheep around him on a hill. I can see vividly in my mind a picture in one of the Sunday school rooms at Central Christian Church in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, the church in which I grew up. I know you've seen this picture, the one where Jesus is carrying a lamb around his shoulders. It shows us the loving, caring side of Jesus. The Jesus who cares for each one of us as a shepherd cares for the flock. The Jesus that knows each one of our names. In the first couple of verses of this text, we hear that the sheep hear the shepherd's voice. Not only do they hear the voice, but the shepherd calls each sheep by name. The shepherd leads them and goes ahead of them. The sheep follow the shepherd, and they know the shepherd's voice. Shepherds basically lived with their flocks, right? They dwelled with their flocks. The sheep were their livelihood, of course, but an understanding of the shepherd as safety and protector, and the one who feeds and the one who cares must have, I assume, become a part of the sheep's understanding. We all know that the word pastor comes from the image of shepherd and sheep and leading and following and the pastoral setting of the countryside with sheep and all of that. Some churches even refer to their caring groups or elder groups as their shepherding groups. It's a nice image of what church can be. It's wonderful to think of someone or some group that knows you so well that they can call you by name and you know that you're safe and protected when you're with them. Oh, it's beautiful. If we look closely at this text, though, and place it into context, contrary to popular belief, this text is not instructions on how ministers should interact with the church members. This text is about the identity of Jesus, which then informs who we are as disciples of Christ. Placing this text into context in the Gospel of John means that we have to go back to chapter 9. In the Gospel of John, Jesus has a habit of performing a sign, having a discussion or debate about the sign. Jesus or other people will discuss it, and then Jesus telling us about the sign. Some refer to it as sign, discussion, debate, discourse. The part of John 10 that we read today is part of the discourse of the sign that happened back in chapter 9. The sign back in chapter 9 of a blind man, a person blind from birth, who receives sight. A reminder of how that story goes. Jesus and his disciples are walking along and they see a blind person. The disciple asks, who sinned? The person or his parents? And Jesus says, no one sinned. They were born blind so that God's work may be revealed. Jesus then spits on the ground, makes mud with his saliva, and spreads the mud on the non-seeing person's eyes. And Jesus tells them to go wash their eyes in the pool of Siloam. And the blind person does just that and now can see. The previously blind person's neighbors and others start saying, hey, isn't that the blind person that used to sit around all day and beg? And other neighbors and people say, no, it's just someone who looks like them. The person who can now see says, hey, it's me. They proceed to tell everyone what happened with Jesus, and everyone asks, well, then where is Jesus? And this now seeing person says, I don't know. So they take the seeing person to the religious leaders. They ask the person with the now clear eyes, how is it that you can see? You were blind and you sat around and begged all day. They tell the religious leaders exactly what Jesus did, and the religious leaders, well, they were a tad upset because whoever it was that gave this blind person who was cut off from full life in the community, this person who had to beg to have food and shelter, whoever gave sight, whoever brought them into community, did it on the Sabbath. Holy moly, we all know healing on the Sabbath is a sin. Well, the story's longer, but suffice it to say that more debate, discussion happens. The person who is now able to see, those who walked past them, those who did not make sure that they had the basic necessities of life, those people finally drive the once blind, now seeing person out of the worship space. The person who can now see how neighbors and the religious leaders are treating them catches up with Jesus. The full sight person tells Jesus that they believe that Jesus is the one. Jesus then pretty much says that the neighbors and the religious leaders are the ones who cannot see. Some of the religious leaders overhear this and say, hey, Jesus, you're not talking about us, are you? And Jesus says, your sins remain. And then, at chapter 10, what we have always read as a sweet, loving discourse by Jesus about the gate and the shepherd turns out to be sweet and loving, but not for everyone. Not for the neighbors and the religious leaders who did not work for justice for the blind person. We hear about a shepherd and sheep, thieves, bandits, gatekeepers, strangers, and a gate. These are the images that Jesus uses to share what it means that he healed a blind person when everyone else was indifferent. We all know that thieves and bandits are indifferent to the needs of the sheep, right? They're just after what they're after. Who cares what the sheep need? Jesus says in verse 10 that the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. Jesus says that he is the gate of what we would call the sheep pen. Jesus says, I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. Whoa. That sounds kind of exclusionary for a grace upon grace kind of gospel, doesn't it? And I guess in some ways it is. Reverend Dr. Caroline Lewis, my Doctor of Ministry preaching professor, says that we need to ask what is salvation for the blind person who has to sit and beg every day. From what do they need to be saved? Well, the blind person is saved from marginalization and isolation. Never again will they wonder where their next meal will be or who will answer their pleas as they sit begging outside the city. They will know safety and security Although I will add, except that the community just kicked them out. But with Jesus, they will know. All who follow Jesus will know. All who respond to the shepherd's voice will know sustenance and security. The basic needs of life, food, water, shelter, intimacy, Jesus offers tangible grace and life. It is those who are indifferent, the thieves, the bandits, that do not offer life. And in this case, the thieves and the bandits are the now seen person's neighbors and the religious leaders. As Jesus is continuing to share about the sheep and the shepherd, he says, I am the good shepherd. Oh my goodness, Psalm 23, God is my shepherd. The community reading John's words for the first time know that Jesus is saying he is the one. He is the good shepherd, the one who cares, the one who offers life, the one who ultimately knows the sheep, the one who will provide green grass, clean water, and a feast. Unlike the hired hand, who has no stake at all in whether the sheep make it back to the pen. Right? You win one, you lose one, maybe your pay gets docked if all the sheep don't come back. Unlike the hired hand, who when danger approaches runs, while the good shepherd stays and confronts the danger so that the sheep, the vulnerable, are safe. Now, there's a lot going on here, right? It's the Gospel of John. There's always a lot going on. But here there are people such as the blind person who need help, and no one will help, and then Jesus comes and helps, and then people are upset that the blind person can see on the Sabbath. Then Jesus enters the story again and is filled with words of love and grace for the sheep, and really for all, unless we are indifferent or we don't care, then this story isn't filled with quite as much love. Thieves, bandits, hired hands, they don't fare so well in this story. Thieves, bandits, hired hands, you know who I'm talking about. For example, those who are indifferent to what is happening to our black siblings, our brown siblings, our Asian siblings, our fill-in-the-blank siblings who aren't like us, who don't look like us. The late Holocaust survivor and Nobel Peace Prize laureate Elie Wiesel said, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. To the indifferent person, their neighbors are of no consequence. Their hidden or even visible anguish is of no interest. Indifference reduces the other to an abstraction. Thieves, bandits, hired hands. Why was the community of the now seen blind person indifferent to them? Why do the thieves and bandits, the neighbors and religious leaders treat the clear-eyed person so poorly? Why is it that the hired hand really doesn't care deeply about the sheep? I mean, we care, don't we? Do we care? Do we really care about the lives of our neighbors? I'm not talking about your next door neighbor, whom I hope you do care about. I'm talking about all of the residents of the places where we live. Do we really care about people having the safety and sustenance of what a good shepherd would offer sheep? Do we work to be the gatekeeper, to go in front of those less vulnerable, to keep the thieves and the bandits away? Do we stand up to the wolves on behalf of those in need? Do we show love by risking what we have and what we know and who we know so that our neighbors will have the fullness of life, abundance of life? Do we stand at the gate welcoming all into the loving care, or do we lean up against a gatepost and stay in a state of indifference? not really care one way or the other. If it isn't happening near my sheep pen, that's somebody else's problem. Or running away when danger comes. These are good questions to think about, aren't they? They make us reflect a little on who we are and what we hold to be true and what is important to us in our lives. If we are thieves and bandits, we are destroying life. If we're indifferent, then we're allowing harm to happen and missing out on the fullness of life. But here's the thing. For Christians, we call ourselves followers of Christ. We claim the one who said, I am the gate. I am the good shepherd. We say that we follow this one who offers life to all. We journey with this one who says, I am, and gives his life long before crucifixion to care and love those whom the dominant culture has thrown away. Those who are vulnerable, those who aren't from around here, those who march in the streets day after day just asking that we stop killing their children. If that is who we follow, the one who cares for the sheep and knows each one by name, then maybe we need to remember his questions to us. After the resurrection, the disciples went fishing, and then they saw Jesus on the shore cooking breakfast for them. After they had eaten, Jesus turned to Peter and said, Simon Peter, do you love me more than these? And Peter said, Yes, Jesus, you know that I love you. Jesus said, Feed my lambs. Jesus asked Peter again, Do you love me? And Peter said, You know that I love you. Jesus said, Tend my sheep. Jesus asked a third time, Do you love me? And Peter said, You know everything, Jesus. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, Feed my sheep. Feed my lambs. Tend my sheep. Feed my sheep. I personally don't hear room for indifference as an answer to the question of, do you love me? Instead, I hear an invitation from the resurrected Jesus for us to care for the sheep, our neighbor, the stranger, the sheep, not of our fold, all of God's children. And I believe that we can do it. But just in case we can't, or we won't, or we choose indifference toward our neighbor over love, just in case we're a little more like the thieves or the bandits or those who are indifferent like the hired hand, is this where the grace upon grace in chapter 1 of this gospel comes into play? I really hope so. For all of us. I really hope so.
Oh God, when I stop, really stop, and step outside of myself, I realize just how self-absorbed I am. Do I really love the lambs of God? Do I acknowledge their lived experience and connect with their suffering? I fall short. Thanks be to God for grace upon grace. I must admit it. Sometimes I'm indifferent. I offer lip service. I may name the issues, but do I actually do anything to effectuate change? I fall short. Thanks be to God for grace upon grace. Yes, it really is true. I want to be a good shepherd or a good member of the flock, but I fail to make eye contact, thus rendering God's precious sheep invisible and reinforcing their marginalization and isolation. I fall so short. Thanks be to God for grace upon grace. What if I'm the thief and the bandit who has participated in stealing and destroying? No, I haven't actively engaged in such behaviors, but my lack of action means I'm complicit. Oh no, I am the hired hand. When danger approaches, I run away. Thank you, O God, for the gift of grace upon grace, because it offers us a new day and a new chance to respond to the Good Shepherd and to love all of his sheep. Thanks be to God. Amen.